From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Mary O'Grady and Joe Sternberg. Let's turn to the really unbelievable increases in energy costs that we're seeing in Europe and the supply problems. Joe Sternberg, you're in London. You see it, I guess, probably in your own bills, what's happening in Europe. Tell us a little bit of what we're seeing, particularly as the cooler season arrives and winter confronts us.
Well, disaster, I think, is the best way to describe what's going on with energy prices across Europe right now, because I think it's a combination of factors. The immediate causes do have to do with the war in Ukraine and sanctions that European countries have imposed on some Russian fuel exports into Europe, particularly oil and coal, and then also the fact that Russia itself has been reducing its deliveries of natural gas. And so I think that those three factors are contributing to drive up the costs of those fuels. And then on top of that, you have this longer running problem of Europe's green transition, where they have really been investing very heavily in renewables like solar and wind that unfortunately are not reliable enough to power advanced industrial economies. At the same time that a lot of European countries have been pulling back from nuclear, which would be a non-carbon emitting fuel source that would be reliable enough to provide that baseload power. So all of these factors together are creating real supply crises that also are driving these phenomenal increases in costs. I mean, the British regulator announced on Friday that household electricity and natural gas prices in the United Kingdom are going to go up 80% on one day in October.
One day?
Yes, because they have a regulatory price cap that resets every 6 months. So right now, people are still digesting the 54% increase that was imposed from one day to the next back in April, and now you're going to have another 80% increase. And you're starting to see this pattern repeating across Europe. Germany is another economy that is an acute energy crisis, and their household and industrial bills are just going to be soaring by several 100%. Sometimes the increase will be, and that will be when they can get supply, because the other problem is going to just be shortages of gas or shortages of electricity or unstable electric supply.
On that supply point, Mary, you see these countries now scrambling for coal, trying to get coal to fill the difference. You see firewood, even people looking for firewood to heat their homes. I saw one article in the British press this morning pointing out that 1 in 4 British households say they don't think they're going to turn the heat on this winter because they're not sure they can afford it. I mean, I know that the UK isn't as cold as, say, the American Midwest or the Northeast, but still, I mean, it does get cold. I've been in London when it's been cold.
I think the English might have to go to the Irish technology known as peat. It's a really grim forecast for, I've been looking at Europe a lot, and French and German one-year futures market prices are just parabolic. You kind of look at that and you wonder how they're going to get through this winter. Of course, we know what the mistakes were, and Joe mentioned the green transition. They were all excited. Angela Merkel, I think, is probably the poster child for this, that, they were going to go green, but they forgot that they didn't really have the technology available yet. And so they're just not going to be able to rely there. Spain and Portugal, I think, are in slightly better position because they have LNG terminals, and their outlook, it's of course a little bit warmer there also, but their outlook looks better for the winter. But the idea that we were going to be green before we had the technology, and our Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm insists the technology is there, but it's really not there for the storage capabilities that make green energy reliable. So they're just up a creek, and it's really difficult to see how they get through this winter without, as Jay Powell might call it, a lot of pain.
Angela Merkel, Mary mentioned, Joe, the former chancellor of Germany, I think responsible in retrospect, and we criticized the decisions at the time, but now they look terrible. Two of the worst decisions taken by a democratic leader in the post-World War II era. Number one, Vladimir Putin thinking he could be appeased with economic ties alone, and second, making Germany vulnerable to Russian energy with its policies on green energy, investing something like $1 trillion over the years in wind power and solar, Joe. And yet when you need it in crunch time, it's not there. It's not there. They need it now. This is the emergency period. She also shut down nuclear plants, and now they've got only 3 running. There's a debate in Germany, I know you follow it closely, over whether to let those shut down at the end of the year or keep them going. But are Europeans internalizing now what those mistakes were?
I think that they are starting to, but you can't underestimate the extent to which large sections of the European public now deeply and truly believes in a lot of issues, like a lot of things like the carbon targets and carbon dioxide emissions reductions.
And net zero, I guess. Net zero by 2050 or something?
Yeah, that's usually the target, and that is popular. So there's going to have to be a long process of educating voters about what the costs of that actually are. And you're starting to see some signs that that's happening. I think that this debate about those 3 nuclear reactors in Germany is a real instructive moment for a lot of voters. And you are starting to see that the polling is shifting on that. Nuclear power has always been very controversial in Germany, which is why Angela Merkel's decision to phase it out after 2011 was popular. But now if you look at opinion polling over the past couple months, there has been a remarkable shift where even members of parties like the Green Party that historically were deeply hostile to nuclear, those voters are starting to come around too. You have a new discussion about the importance to diversify gas supplies, because part of the problem with the green transition is that while they were shutting down nuclear and also prohibiting things like domestic shale gas fracking to explore for natural gas within Europe, they were becoming more and more dependent on pipelines to Russia to import natural gas. And so you have a discussion now about the need to develop new terminals so that they can import gas from other parts of the world. And that also is a very healthy discussion that I think is going to bear fruit over time. Time is just the thing that they don't have, because we are 2 or 3 months away from the cold months by this point. And, a lot of this infrastructure takes years to build.
I guess one of the big concerns, Mary, is just how much this winter of discontent will influence the public support for Ukraine and its war with Vladimir Putin, because if people begin to think that support for Ukraine is the reason they're suffering, that public support could diminish.
I think, Paul, you just shared with us Vladimir Putin's thinking. He certainly expects that if he squeezes Europe hard enough, particularly with respect to this energy supplies, that he's going to get some kind of a deal. I mean, some analysts are writing that basically what he would try to offer is that he gets to stay in the Donbass in exchange for some kind of gets to keep what he thinks he has gained in this war so far. And in exchange, he would open the gas lines again. And of course, it will be all done in the name of peace. Obviously, it would be very unfortunate because he's clearly not going to end there. That would just be a chance for him to take a break and regroup so that he can continue on his project, which is to get all of Ukraine.
Yeah, and Joe, just to finish up here, lessons for America through all of this. I guess one lesson is don't impose price caps even for 6 months. That's catastrophic when the price increases inevitably hit and its impact on supply. What other lessons you draw here?
Well, I think the big lesson is the technology point that Mary raised a couple minutes ago, which is that the technology does not exist to power an advanced industrial economy with renewable sources. So I think that the big lesson that the U.S. needs to be learning from the European experience is that wishing that technology into existence isn't going to make it so. And you are just storing up trouble for the future sooner rather than later, often sooner. If you are planning to push ahead with this green transition without having that backup plan of reliable fossil fuels or nuclear available to meet your heating, your lighting, your industrial power needs.
Yeah, and that word sooner is the right one, because even though the net zero goal may be 2050. What you need are policies in place to be able to drive to that. And what's happening is when you create those policies through a combination of mandates, taxes, and subsidies for green energy, taxes and mandates to reduce fossil fuels and other sources of energy, you end up with the incentives to investment being perverse and not creating enough of the baseload power you need in fossil fuels, nuclear, and so on. So people overinvest in solar and wind, and then if you get a cold spell or the sun doesn't shine, you are left with a very big problem. And that's what we're already seeing in California. We've seen some of that in Texas and a cold spell in the winter. And now we're seeing in New York State, the energy supplies are so low that they got a lecture recently from the Biden administration about getting with it to fill the shortfall. So we're seeing some of the same problems that exist in Europe hitting the United States now, although not as severely yet. But give it time. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Joe. And thank you all listeners for joining us today. We're here every day on Potomac Watch. Send those notes to pwpodcast@wsj.com. Thanks for listening.